The technical problems this morning. Isn't that crazy? Hey, everybody. AM 1230 WJOB on 104.7 FM, the voice and face of the region. This is the JED in America statement or segment here. I typically started a little bit earlier, had a little technical issue this morning early. So let's just get right to what's going on around everywhere. I guess the biggest thing right now, at least in some areas, is what's going on in Washington, just like it is always. I got to read you a tweet yesterday from President Trump. It's kind of a weird thing, and I'm going to compare it here to what's going on here locally. I hereby demand, and will do so officially tomorrow, that the Department of Justice look into whether or not the FBI and the Department of Justice infiltrated or surveilled the Trump campaign for political purposes, and if any such demands or requests were made by people within the Obama administration. So, what does that mean? So, really, what is happening is that the investigatees are demanding to investigate the investigators, if that makes any sense. As you guys well know, the America's kind of on hold, really, as Robert Mueller does an investigation of whether Russia influenced our election in 2016, and there's no resolution to that, and it's been going on for a year, and we talk about it almost daily because it's such a good soap opera story. And now President Trump is demanding that this happen. Now, let's just take the Tribune, okay? It's the White House said Monday that top FBI official and Justice Department officials have agreed to meet with congressional lawmakers and review highly classified information the lawmakers have been seeking as they scrutinize the handling of the Russia investigation. The agreement came after President Trump. Hey, what's up? President Trump demanded that the Justice Department investigate whether the FBI infiltrated his presidential campaign. It's unclear what the members will be allowed to review or if the Justice Department will be providing any documents to Congress. So, at the same time, they're going to review the documents. They're also basically going to start looking. Are they going to look into if the Obama administration went after Trump for political purposes? It's crazy stuff, man. It's just a crazy world. And let's look here. All right. What if around here we had, like, say you were just started to investigate the investigators? And what you have in Northwest Indiana is a lot of political corruption, and you have a federal prosecutor's office that's been going after it and has put 60 indictments or so in the last, 10 or 12 years on local elected leaders, basically, or local leaders. And what if we started turning that on the local feds instead? How do you think that would go around here? What if when Sheriff John Butzich, who just went to prison for 15 years, over 15 grand, over 4.5 years on his campaign, when they started investigating him, he said, oh yeah, well, why don't we investigate the feds? It just seems comical, right? But it doesn't seem comical at the national level because it just keeps getting odder and odder, if you know what I mean. All right, here we go. What else is going on? Police backed by aircraft and trained dogs have scoured a greater Baltimore suburb into the early hours today, seeking suspects believed armed and dangerous after the death of a female officer. Baltimore County Police say that the enormous manhunt was continuing unabated in the suburban community of Perry Hall, Maryland, where witnesses reported hearing a pop before seeing a Jeep run over the officer Monday afternoon. The dark will not hamper our investigation, said police. The officer, who wasn't immediately identified, was bleeding badly from significant injuries and was pronounced dead after being rushed to a hospital. You know, if I remember this correctly, it's 56 officers killed now. And Will, can you make sure they haven't found this guy? This story is about 3 hours old that I'm reading right now. So just make sure that it hasn't happened here in the early hours that I missed. What are we doing I mean, 56 officers killed in the line of duty now so far this year, and it's only May. Now here we are here locally to once again use a local reference, and that is that on Saturday night, 2 policemen were shot after a melee at a local bar. I'll talk about that as soon as I get to my local radio show here in just a little bit. I don't know, man. It just seems that there's not as much respect for the uniform, for the idea, for institutions in general, if you really think about it. But we'll cover that at another time. Let's get to it. Energized by the Me Too movement, 2 national advocacy groups are teaming up to lodge sexual harassment complaints against McDonald's on behalf of 10 women who worked at the fast food restaurant in 9 cities. The workers, one of them a 15-year-old from St. Louis, alleged groping, propositions for sex, indecent exposures, and lewd comments by supervisors. According to their complaints, when the women reported the harassment, they were ignored or mocked and in some cases suffered retaliation. The legal effort was organized by Fight for 15, which campaigns to raise pay for low-wage workers. And in related news with another fast food restaurant, Starbucks, they had this issue where they arrested the 2 black men for sitting there waiting for their white buddy to show up. And they said, well, you got to buy something. And they said, well, hey, we're just waiting for a buddy. I don't know if they're going for a bike ride or whatever. And instead they got arrested. This is going crazy on social media. Starbucks Corporation tried to dig itself out of controversy Monday by attempting to clarify a policy toward non-paying guests that generated an onslaught of weekend criticism. The Seattle-based retailer on Saturday had said it would allow all guests in its U.S. company-owned stores to use its cafes, including its restrooms, whether or not they make a purchase. That announcement also drew complaints that cafes wouldn't have enough seats for paying customers and would turn into homeless shelters and drug havens. On Monday, Starbucks revealed more about the policy, saying employees now have detailed instructions on what to do if someone is behaving in a disruptive manner. At issue, in essence, is whether Starbucks views itself as a business that caters to customers or a quasi-public place generally welcome to all. And I got to tell you that the Starbucks model comes out of the West Coast coffee shop model. And I went to college at the University of California at Berkeley and hung out in coffee shops before Starbucks. And I always thought it was the coolest thing to go into these shops and just lay your papers out. You didn't have a computer then. And just be able to get a cup of coffee. And a lot of people were doing that. And then next thing you know, basically, Starbucks not only exported the good coffee to the Midwest and everywhere else, they exported the idea of just kind of hanging out in a coffee shop. It's kind of gotten a little bit commercialized, but it's an idea that is a good idea, and a lot of people make use of it, especially a lot of people that work from home or are looking for jobs and stuff. But I can tell you this, that just from being in Berkeley in the early and mid 80s, that it gets very quickly with the open atmosphere in Berkeley, it gets very quickly to a point where there are a lot of homeless people hanging out in the coffee shops. And by the way, one of the things that was just, I could never quite wrap my head around in Berkeley was this place called People's Park. And they had basically a square city block right off of Telegraph Avenue. And there was some brush in there, so you could get a little privacy. But homeless people could sleep there without getting bothered. And it was People's Park. I think it rose out of the 60s. And by the time I was there in the 80s, it was still there. And homeless people slept in there. And once in a while, a student would kind of start doing a lot of drugs and drop out and wind up living in People's Park. I knew a couple people that did it, but I knew one guy pretty well. And I'd just go over there and visit him in People's Park. How you doing? Oh, okay. And he'd be high as a kite, and just mostly it was drug induced sleeping. I mean, there was a lot of schizophrenia and stuff, but then there were people that just chose to be homeless. I mean, there were dozens of them, and then they would flood into these coffee shops because it was an open air atmosphere, and you weren't allowed to kick people out. Really, it was a. I just wonder if that's what will start happening at some of these Starbucks that have in the past said, no, you got to buy something to be here, and now if you don't have to buy something, what will happen? And the guy has a point. All right, let's take a look. Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg faces senior European Union lawmakers today to answer questions about a scandal over the alleged misuse of data of millions of Facebook users. In testimony to be broadcast live, Zuckerberg will be questioned by leaders of the European Parliament's main party groups and committees. Zuckerberg testified last month to the U.S. Congress, but had been non-committal about appearing in Europe. He sent a senior official to speak at the British Parliament and offered to do the same in Brussels, but the EU Assembly insisted on hearing from him in person. And look at the difference here. You have people criticizing Starbucks and also McDonald's, okay? And these are pretty big companies, right? All right, I'm going to look up their market caps, okay? Their market caps are, I got to believe that Google and Facebook have bigger market caps, right? So I can do that on my phone right now. Market capitalization, let's see, Google. All right, and I can look it up right now at market cap of Google is, all right, and go back, and market cap is $750 billion, right? All right, so now let's look up McDonald's. All right, how do you add one? All right, McDonald's. All right, let's go to McDonald's, all right, McDonald's Corporation. There it is. All right, and its market cap is $126 billion. So you see the difference? Google at 750 and McDonald's at 126. And here's the other difference. If you start ripping on McDonald's and you start ripping on Starbucks, you're going to get a bunch of news stories and it's going to just start floating around the web. But what if you start ripping on Facebook and Google? Does it become a little bit different? So if, in other words, if you go and you're a Google person and you start ripping on Google, do all of a sudden you start having little problems? And what happens if you get so powerful and you're using Gmail and you're just, getting a huge following to get more regulation on Google? What happens then? Or what happens on Facebook? Now, who has a bigger market cap, Google or Facebook? What do you guys think, huh? Facebook is at $534 billion, and Google is at $750 billion. Now, I know you're thinking, well, Jed, what about Starbucks? What is that one? Okay, I'll get that for you. And the difference here is that Starbucks, all right, Starbucks Corporation, what's your guess on Starbucks, huh? Let's see, $79 billion. Okay, so it's a dwarf compared. Google is 10 times worth almost 10 times more than Starbucks. Does that surprise anybody? 10 times more than Starbucks. Think how many Starbucks there are. So I'll tell you what, the turd state rises. We are sitting here worried about what Trump tweeted yesterday, and they're worried about minimum wage, and we're worried about immigration, and we're worried about Iran and North Korea, and the third state just keeps rising and rising. It's almost it's a Kurt Vonnegut novel or George Orwell situation. All right, what else we want to look at? We did look at that, and that. Oh, the eruption of the Kilauea volcano in Hawaii sparked new safety warnings about toxic gas on the Big Island's southern coastline after lava began flowing into the ocean and setting off a chemical reaction. The molten rock started pouring into the sea over the weekend. It's been generating plumes of lava haze or laze as it interacts with seawaters. It's just the latest hazard from a weeks-old eruption that has so far generated earthquakes and featured gushing molten rock. All right, so that's enough news for you guys on JED in America this morning. I do want to say that yesterday I was involved in my own little bit of international relations as Jimmy Mulaney and I went to Giuseppe's Italian restaurant here in Cherville. And it is the National Restaurant Show that is in Chicago right now. So they had all sorts of people down from the restaurant show. But mostly what they had, if you could find just a little bit of that, start it where they're frying up the dough, if you would. They had one of the premier pizza chefs in all of the world there. And I'll just explain what this guy made, and then we'll end it here. JED in America will end it with some of the video of this. He takes a piece of dough, all right, and he flattens it out. And it's not just any dough; it's European dough that they import from Italy, which means because it was grown in the EU, it's not GMO. They don't do GMO in well, at least in most of Europe, you can't do GMO. So the dough is imported, and it's you ready to go? I'll get it in a second there. So you could taste the difference, right? So the guy flattens it out, and we watched him do this, and he does basically what Pizza Hut does, but in a little different manner. And then he takes ricotta and he puts it all the way around the outsides, right? And then he flaps it up and dips it, covers up the ricotta. And then he takes that dough and he fries it for about a minute. Then he brings it back to the table and he puts on some San Marzano tomato sauce and then some fresh mozzarella. And then he does a piece of basil on there, and he puts it into this wood-burning oven for 850 degrees. And then that is only in there for a minute. And that is just an amazing pizza. I mean, really, you could see the difference in. All right, guys, I'm Jim Delo, JED in America. Sorry I couldn't go outside today. Had trouble with the wireless microphone crossing signals with some sort of other frequency around here. I don't know if we have to adjust that or whatever. But I am inside the studio here. We're going to finish down here on the radio. And then we will pick up on the other side with JED in the region. All right, let's hear right now. Let's watch some of this pizza preparation right now on the voice and face of the region. And as you guys can see right now, he is. I'll just narrate it because we don't have anything on it. You can see that he is frying up the dough in an actual fryer, and then he's turning it. He's going to pull that out and then put it on the table, and then put it so it's a half fried and half baked pizza. All right, guys, we don't have that. That's like our third technical difficulty in the morning. So at some points, I don't really gaff. I really don't give a nya. All right, see ya.
At Corellis Roofing, we recognize that our employees